Hello, I'm presenting POPs, a method of mitigation of DNS cache poisoning attack. It's a joint work with Ariel Berger from Ariel University and Professor Anat Bremler-Barr from Tel Aviv University. DNS poisoning attacks are widely spread and are still very dangerous. We've seen many CVEs in the last 20 years, and still a new attack just surfaced up and reported in SP 2024. So the attack is still active and dangerous, remains pervasive. In this talk, I will show you a new, fast and efficient detection and mitigation of all statistical DNS poisoning attacks with 0 false negatives and negligible amount of false positives. We see standard statistical attacks. We deal with fragmentation attacks and with out-of-bailiwick poisoning attacks. We do not detect or mitigate session hijacking attacks that involve either man-in-the-middle poisoning or BGP hijacking. Okay, at a very high level, a DNS request goes from a client to a recursive resolver that delivers the request to an authoritative server to resolve the IP address of the domain in question, and getting the result from an authoritative name server and passing it on to the client that can now go and surf and deal with its bank account over the bank website. In a poisoning attack, an attacker comes in, knowing that there is a request for bank.com, quickly responds with the incorrect IP address for bank.com, trying to trick the client to visit its own website, which will mount a phishing attack on bank.com. Well, the recursive resolver receiving the fake response that spoofs the authoritative server, it's over UDP, so it's easy to spoof the IP address of the authoritative server, checks that it is indeed for bank.com domain. Yes, it is for the same domain. It checks whether the port number or the transaction ID are correct. The attackers have techniques to guess one of these two, but not both. So either one of them has to be guessed, and the attacker has to send many packets, many times 65,000 of them, until it gets the one it doesn't know how to guess correctly. Here you see the red one. Bingo gets all the parameters correctly and gets into the resolver, and it's passing the wrong IP address to the client, which is now tricked into a phishing attack mounted by the attacker. First, the poisoning attack that leads to phishing attack. How do we do for detection? We detect any response for the same domain that arrives more than 5 times within a short period of time. We say this is an attack to do poisoning attack. And we block all the subsequent responses to the same domain. This is our detection. And we do the mitigation. We send the recursive resolver a response, spoofing again the authoritative server, asking the recursive resolver, please ask your question again over TCP by flipping the TC bit on the response on. This is a standard technique in the DNS protocol that nearly all the recursive resolver around the world obey. And the recursive resolver asks the question again over TCP. This connection cannot be spoofed. No fake responses could be generated from an incorrect IP address, and only authentic responses of the server are accepted by the recursive resolver, and the client can go to its bank.com website safe and secure. Attackers have lost the game. So we saw detection with minimum amount of false negative, allowing a very few correct, authentic responses to be labeled as negative. This happens if a legitimate response is stuttering and sends the same response again and again, and negligible amount of false positives. The amount of successful attacks is in the first, if you succeeded in the 5 attempts out of the 65,000. which is with this small amount of less than 1 promille chance of success. And the mitigation doesn't add any false positive because it doesn't allow any good ones to pass. All the good ones have to complete the TCP, and they successfully do. None of the attack responses manage to go over TCP, and we get 0 false negative with negligible amount of false positives. Altogether, we catch nearly 100% of the attacks with 0 false negatives. And we assume that all the resolvers obey the rule to come back over TCP when the TCP bit is on. There's a small amount of resolvers, less than 3%, the non-negligible amount of DNS traffic. So let's do the second type of attack that we handle, which is fragmentation. In a correct fragmentation response, authoritative server may have a slightly too large response to fit into one UDP packet. So it says, I will send it in fragments, say 2 fragments. Fragments may come due to traffic out of order arrive at the recursive resolver. The second fragment may arrive first. Recursive resolver says, okay, this is the identification number, 16-bit, identifying the packet that I'm reconstructing, creates a table. When the first fragment arrives, it reconstructs the whole response, sending it to the client, which now have the correct IP address for its query. When an attacker comes in, he's pulling the fragmentation response. He quickly responds with his own second fragmentation. Now he's guessing some identification number. Attackers have learned over the years how to correctly guess there are attacks that know how to correctly guess what will be the fragmentation ID number used by the authoritative name server. If they don't know, they will have to guess, this is again 16-bit. And once one of them is correctly guessed, or we know to guess it ahead of time, when the first fragment arrives from the authoritative server, the complete response is compiled, and the incorrect IP address that the attacker have planted in the second fragment goes to the client, which is now tricked into the phishing attack. Okay, what do we do for detection and mitigation? We detect any fragment, any UDP packet that is labeled as a fragment, part of a larger response, is blocked. All of them are blocked. And if we don't know where it's coming from, it's blocked. And we do, for mitigation, we tell the recursive resolver, please ask this question again over TCP. The response will be large enough to take the full response, and TCP we cannot fake, the attacker cannot get in. TCP uses a 3-way handshake to authenticate the authoritative name server, and only the legitimate authentic responses are accepted by the recursive resolver and are passed to the client. Client is safe accessing its bank account, and the attacker has lost the game again. Okay, what do we have here for the false negatives? Oh boy, in the detection, we block all of them, the good ones and the bad ones, 100% false negatives, and we don't allow anybody to go through. So nothing succeeds and 0 false positives. But in the mitigation, using the TCP connection, we have 0 false negative and 0 false positive. So all the ones that are suspicious are passed to the mitigation, and only the good ones can pass the mitigation. We get 0 false negatives in total, 0 false positives, and altogether we block 100% of the fragmentation poisoning, DNS poisoning attacks with 0 false negatives. Again, assuming the recursive resolver do respond to the TC bit and go over TCP. Let's see, the last and third type of attack is an out-of-bailiwick attack. First, let's see what is the correct behavior within bailiwick. A request goes, this time for foobar.com, and goes to the authoritative server that may respond now with a packet with the correct answer for foobar.com. However, it says, I want to tell you some more information that I have. The name server for bank.com domain is ns1.attacker.com. And I also attach a glue record. This is .com, so both are within the same top-level domain. So you can believe me because I'm dealing with the top-level domain responses. And I attach a glue record. Trust me, this is the IP address of name server for attacker.com. And the recursive resolver notices, records it in its cache, and sends the response for foobar to the client. Next, when the client asks about bank.com, it goes and asks the IP address it was given by the glue record, the name server at 6666, and gets the correct response, and the correct IP address for the bank.com arrives to the client. In an out-of-bailiwick attack, the client responds with a packet of its own, again, spoofing the authoritative name server. But now this is out of bailiwick because the attacker doesn't have the capabilities to register a name server in the top-level domain.com. So it tells the recursive resolver, look, I'm bank.com is in, the name server is in .NET domain. And believe me, the IP address is 777. Well, this time its glue record should have been ignored because it's not in the same top-level domain. This is why it is called out of bailiwick. This domain is outside of the jurisdiction of this domain. There are quite a few at least, recursive resolver that do not obey the out of bailiwick rule and do take the incorrect IP address, and the attackers use it. So they implant the incorrect name server for bank.com. When a request comes from the client, it is sent to the malicious name server, which responds with the incorrect IP address for bank.com, which is now passed to the client, which is tricked into a phishing attack as the attacker wanted. What do we do for detection and mitigation of out of bailiwick? We block all out of bailiwick responses. Our software checks whether the .com, the IP, the domain we record for and the domain we ask for are in the same jurisdiction. If not, this response is ignored and blocked. So let's summarize. So the first detection mitigation, we mitigated any response that comes for the same domain more than 5 times. We stop all these responses. We use the count means catch as an efficient mechanism to detect same domain repeating more than 5 times within a short period of time, like 10 seconds. And we have any fragmentations are blocked and asked to come back over TCP. Same thing for out of bailiwick, actually only blocking. Anything out of bailiwick, drop it. As we see, there are many attacks that have been reported in the last 20 years, all the way up to the last attack reported a year ago by Lee et al. And we detect all of them. Here are the rules that we use to detect them, even if only one packet is required for the attack. Because fragmentations, we block on the first fragment. And we also block those that require repeating smaller number of statistical attacks, but still a few hundreds of repetitions. We block and mitigate all of these attacks, and we cover all the CVEs that have been going out in the last 20 years, reporting about and patching DNS poisoning attacks. We compare our work to 2 IDSs, Suricata and Snort. These 2 are detection system, intrusion detection systems. So they are passive, they don't have any mitigation. And for their detection, they don't know how to aggregate on domain name. They only aggregate on fields in the IP packet. So they will be hard time to detect the attack, and our system detects it much faster than what Suricata Snort detects such poisoning attacks, with after analyzing much fewer packets, like 5% of the packet that Suricata or Snort need to analyze for the detection, and we have very small amounts, a small number of false negatives. In conclusion, we've seen 3 simple rules to detect the different poisoning attacks. We mitigate the standard statistical attacks and fragmentation attacks with the TC flag asking the resolver to come back over TCP with 0 false negatives and 0 false positives. Our mitigation can be integrated with a lot of different detection methods, resulting in a high quality detection and mitigation system, because the mitigation has 0 false negatives and 0 false positives. Thank you very much for listening. You can visit our lab website, and you can see all the details about our attack in the Zenodo records, also given in the paper.